Hello, this is Hee-jung from South Korea, and it's really good to see you in person. And then I want to say, thank you so much for the beautiful film. I really enjoyed it. And then me and Mansi will ask, question by turn. So, Mansi, can you say hello?
Hi, hello. Congratulations for the film. We really liked the film. We watched it together and we analyzed it, really tried to come up with some very good questions. I'm from India and I would like to ask you some nice questions about the film that I had in my head while watching the film. So, congratulations and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to be here with the film and appreciate being here in Hungary.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let me ask the question first, actually. My first question is about the title. I think the title was really simple and was fantastic. It means everything in the film. It was amazing. So, but I think it was pretty much difficult to decide the title, isn't it? So, can you tell us about the background, how you decide the title? And besides, is there any like a candidate beside the territory?
I'm so happy you asked this question because it was such a struggle for us to come up with a title. In fact, we had many working titles over the years. This film took almost 4 years to make, and we had a small team and it slowly grew and grew, and we had various ideas. At one point it was Saga Amazonia, based on this song that Indigenous sings in the canoe. That's quite a beautiful song.
Yes.
At other points it was the invasion of Rio Bonito, but that never felt right because it felt like we were editorializing. We really struggled, and we actually ended up making a poll, and ended up, we had a huge film family by the end. We ended up taking it out to a few hundred close friends, and the territory prevailed. Thankfully, we're all very happy. And I think it gets at the core of what this film is about, which is about the different sides' relationship to the land. And I think we wanted to make sure that the film felt grounded in that at its core.
Yeah, that's really good. So Mansi, can you ask the next question?
My next question would be that that obviously Indigenous people are actually influenced or victims of capitalism and colonialism by the Western world, or maybe the outsiders. So being an American, what was the thing that actually made you interested to make such a film about Indigenous people, and what were your struggles while as a filmmaker, while being there and deal with their history, with their culture and everything, and without being judgmental and knowing everything about them and then presenting it to the world in such a way? So we are curious to know about that.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to recognize that when it comes to the big problems of climate change and of just environmental destruction, ecological collapse, Indigenous people are carrying such an unfair burden, there's something like 5% of the population of the world, and they protect something like 85 or 80% of biodiversity in the whole planet. And so I think that for us, it was important to come with humility and with solidarity. We are, us meaning the outside international crew. Speaking for myself, it's really, really remarkable and incredible, the knowledge systems and the way that their societies put together to make decisions collectively and to work in a very different way than we're used to when we come from an outside capitalist nuclear family type of culture. And I think that one of the strongest decisions that we came to as a film and as a project was to come to this collective co-production model where the film is made in co-production with the community. The community, there was a really strong wake-up call that happened early on in the film. Early on in the making of the film. The way that the community works is that they have 6 different villages, and they all have to get together, and there has to be people from every village meeting, talking, and they have to reach a complete unanimous consensus before they can move forward with any decision. And so while we were there was a meeting happening that we were there for. It was actually about something different. It was a linguist who was studying their language and He was from an American university, and the idea was to create a dictionary so they could teach and preserve their language in schools. And on paper, it seemed like a very nice project. But the elders had gotten together and were very skeptical, and they said no. They were worried that if this guy wrote down their language, that he would own it, and that they would have to pay him to be able to speak. And it was a really important, I think, wake-up call for us, just to recognize how much had been stolen from this community by people who looked like us, by white people. And so our entire process of working together was born out of a recognition of that exploitation and trying not to do exploitative filmmaking. And so that's when we started to recognize that to do informed consent, we couldn't just come and ask them to sign a piece of paper release. We had to engage with a much deeper process of breaking down what documentary filmmaking is, how it works. And we brought down little cameras, and we did exercises. We'll film you, we'll interview you, you interview us. And we used kind of the process to open a conversation around the power of filmmaking and what our goals were, so that we could make sure that our goals and their goals were aligned, and ultimately it becomes one team and it becomes one set of goals. And I think that was really critical. And I think that our biggest and highest aspiration is to create a platform for Indigenous voices to be more present in important spaces that they're not generally let into as much as they should be, and especially in climate movement and other spaces, and also in the film industry. And so that's what we're hoping to do, and it's been a real honor being part of it.
It's really interesting and really impressive that you give it such a big thought about these things. And I would like Hee-jun to proceed with the next question.
Okay, my next question is about the high-tech indigenous generation. I mean, it was so interesting for me. It was such a nice twist, actually. I enjoyed the most, actually, among the film. And then I feel like, they had to protect themselves with those kind of high-tech device, because the government did not protect them. So otherwise, the history will repeat. So, I mean, I totally agree. And I have no, bad feelings toward it. But on the other hand, if we think about the bottom line, the reason we have to protect this territory and indigenous group, as you said, it's because we have to protect our planet Earth from the climate change and the danger of ecosystem. All those problems actually comes from those kind of industrial products, which indigenous generation is using, the drones and cameras and everything. So I think it's a little bit paradoxical. To protect their territory, they're using another industrial product. So what do you think about it? I think this is amazing concept. Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting, this is something that I think there's an unfortunate kind of line in Brazil that the right wing uses to try to disparage indigenous people who engage with modern technology. There's this line that Bolsonaro has used where he calls them iPhone indigenous.
Okay.
And it's meant to be an insult. And the idea there is that by engaging with modernity, by being on social media, by being an outspoken and savvy member of modern society, somehow that makes you less indigenous. And this younger generation, as you say, this tech savvy younger indigenous generation rejects that wholesale. And I think they're proudly able to be both. They're both modern, savvy. They're using these tools to protect their land. And they're also indigenous. And they're even using those tools to protect their traditional cultures. They're using that to document the elders and those stories, and trying to create ways to pass that along to even the next generations. In the case of the Uru-eu-wau-wau, using the impact campaign of the film, we're partnering with them to build a cultural center, which is going to have podcasting studios, and it's going to have more cameras and more equipment. And the purpose of that for them largely is to preserve their culture.
Yeah, they should.
So I think for us, it looks like, for people on the outside, it may look like a paradox. because we have these expectations, and there are so many subtle reinforcements of these stereotypes that Indigenous people must be a certain way. They must live in simplicity in the forest. As soon as they break that mold of expectation, which we've taken in from movies, that we've taken in from outside culture, painting them in this sort of simplistic way, it doesn't compute with our understanding of how they're supposed to live. But they are reclaiming their own power, and they're reclaiming their own sense of indigeneity, and saying, my phone doesn't define my indigeneity. And I think that's really powerful and inspiring.
Thank you so much for the explanation. I was really curious about that, like, and it clarifies my curiosity. Thank you. And Mansi, can you ask next question?
So, like in a conventional narrative, Indigenous people's struggles would have been directed at the government, like coming to the film. Like in a conventional narrative, their struggles would have been directed at the government or capitalists who achieve wealth by developing industries and setting up big factories and all. But you have shown the struggle between socially marginalized people. In addition to the film, the film did not criticize the government for its irresponsible response. So it seems to be referring to the class of post-capitalist society. The invisible class of post-capitalist society made the struggle between classes impossible. Am I being clear?
Yeah, but I think...
sorry. Like, is there a reflection of this post-capitalistic view in showing the struggle of two socially marginalized classes? Do you see it like that?
I see it, I guess, the way that I hope this comes through in the film, and it was something we struggled with because we were never able to get access to one of the really big landowners. But there is a reality, which is that behind the associations, like the groups that come together of these economically marginalized farmers, what they are doing is fundamentally serving a black market that is fueled by mega ranchers and these huge farmers, many of whom are politicians and are ultra capitalists. And so it's such a complicated system. And I think it's important to recognize that both the Indigenous community and these marginalized settler farmers are victims of the same system. And I think that what we wanted to be able to show was how they are pitted against each other, how it's poor against poor, because so much of the land that has been converted to ranching is owned by these bigger farms, and it's out of the hands of the masses of sort of regular people, of working people. And so, Sergio, who's, looking at retiring landless, has this dream. And the narrative he's been fed over and over again is that the people holding him back are the Indigenous people, aren't the mega landowners who create a stacked system against him. And so I think what we're hoping to create a dialogue around is actually how, in an ideal world, these two groups could see each other as allies, and how Indigenous people protect the headwaters of all the rivers that all farming in this part of the Amazon depends on. And there's plenty of land already converted. There's plenty of land that has been taken from forests and turned into ranching. And there's this narrative that Indigenous people are so few and they have so much land. But I would turn it upside down and say, the mega ranchers are so few and they have so much land. And so there's another source of land that could be redistributed better. And I think that would be a solution that I think Indigenous people and I would be for.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of the scene when the person Sergio, who in the first scene he comes up and he says like he always wanted to have his own land, and he feels like this is a very unfair division of property between people. So yeah, that's really interesting. Maybe you proceed. It's to you.
Okay, yeah, like, yes, like you guys said, like, I didn't see the Sergio, the farmers, as a perpetrator in this film, actually. They are also the victim of the social system. So that was my question too. But I'm gonna move on to the next question. It's pretty much practical. Actually, I used to work at the nonprofit art organization before I come to Budapest, back in Seoul, as an independent curator. So my main job was fundraising, actually. So, Will, can you tell me about, like, I feel like, there must be a lot of difficult things for you to raise the fund, actually. So, and then what's worse was that there was a pandemic. So can you tell us about some kind of difficulties, some episodes related with the funding? And plus, can you give us some sort of advice to future, like, filmmaker and producers who wants to work in the documentary film area, like, about the funding?
And the funding was a long, long, long journey. I can tell you that. We, the first, Alex, the director, myself, and Gabriel were kind of the first producers working on the film for the first at least year. And none of us had ever made a feature film. And so we were really trying to figure out how to navigate the industry and how to meet people. We went to every one of these sort of industry speed dating events where you'd meet people from the industry that we could get into. We did, I have lost count, but I would guess over 100 grant applications.
Wow.
And we did quite well ultimately. And I think one of the things, and so we raised more than half the budget in grants.
Wow.
And the film was made completely independently. We're extremely, extremely grateful to have been able to take the film out. And Nat Geo acquired it out of Sundance, which was just the most perfect home to bring this out into the world. But I think it's important to remember that this film was always an independent film that, we fundraised kind of bits and pieces. We did friends and family, kind of Kickstarter style fundraising. And we had lots and lots of wonderful grant support. We got grants from Sundance, from Catapult, from IDA, from Doc Society, from the Moore Foundation, from the Rogovy Foundation, from the Chris Dennis Environmental Foundation. We had many, many grants, small grants that we pieced together to keep production going. And we self-financed a little bit at the beginning. And, in terms of advice for others, I think that for us, we just left no stone unturned. Our biggest single funder came from a cold LinkedIn message where it was just reaching out to someone unprompted, no grant and there was no grant to apply for. We were just reaching out, and that turned into, after about a year of talking to them, our biggest source of funding. And I think that the thing that I think was clever in how we financed this was that we took a model that was inspired from Doc Society, one of the grantors who gave us a recoupable grant. And the idea was, if we sell the film and they can recoup their money, they would put it forward back into the impact campaign. And so we were able to go out to philanthropic funders, people who are interested more in the impact of the film than in the film itself.
That's
and
amazing.
Tell them that our goal was to create impact with this film, but you have to help us make the film in the first place. And so if you can give us money now, we're going to go out and we're going to make a commercially successful film. We're going to sell it, and then that money will come back to you. And then we want you to give us that money again. We want to double dip. We want to make the most. We want every dollar to go twice as far. And I think having that ambition of having not just a film, but also a set of impact goals around it, being able to articulate that to funders who are interested in making that difference in the world, and then coming up with a structure where you can get that money twice. That's really helped us in a big way. And it's helped us, start out the film's rollout with an ambitious impact campaign. And, we've managed to do quite a lot with that, and are just very grateful for that support.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Wow, you did great job. That's amazing. And then, like, any advice to the future documentary filmmakers, like, about the funding? Because we have no classes about how to raise the fund. So would you give me some, practical advice?
Yeah, I think, we were first-time filmmakers. And so a lot of people didn't necessarily, they didn't want to take that risk. We were unproven. We were able to bring in incredible partners who had that credibility, who were able to see in the project, its potential and help us reach that potential. I think but nevertheless, there were lots of deals that fell through, things that we were excited about. But ultimately, in retrospect, I think that the people that we ended up with building this team, building the film team around, it came together because it took so long, and we ended up having to find just the right people. And I'm actually really grateful in some ways that it took that long, because I think my advice is just, it's such a long journey that really pick who you partner with. Just because they have some money and it's really tempting, you need that money really soon, be really mindful of who you work with. And when you go to sign that contract, just make sure that you're happy to work with them and be together on this long journey, because it's a wonderful journey, and you just want to be on it with people who you enjoy working with.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you so much. So my last question is about the reaction of the farmers group after watching the film. What was their reaction like?
So in the making of as we got into the rough cut and as we were getting later in the film, there have been questions around security with the Indigenous and Indigenous communities being under lots and lots of really active threats, especially this year is an election year in Brazil, and the violence and the threats have really ramped up. And so what we did was we went and we showed all of the scenes that included them to Sergio before the film was completely finalized. Because what we wanted to be able to show them was, how are we representing your storyline? Are we reflecting your reality? And they watched those and they were like, totally, you guys got it. Like, this is great. This shows our reality. Go out, thumbs up. We did not show them the full film in person, just out of practical security concerns. If they had been upset, it's impossible to get out of there safely.
Sure.
And there's only one road in and one road out. And the response has been, I think, in general, the response in Brazil has been excellent. We're extremely thrilled with the response. I think at the same time, it's hard to have a nuanced conversation with people who are ultra Bolsonarista right now. The election is in 2 days. Okay. There are, incredibly inflamed rhetoric. And so we're kind of waiting to be able to go back to settler communities and farming communities to show the film. And it's one of our big goals for next year.
Okay, sounds great.
Is to go and do a screening series in these. If we don't talk to the people who are cutting down the forest, we're never going to be able to stop it. And so for us, it's hugely important. And it was important that we represent them with empathy in the film. And so I'm looking forward to that, but it's going to be difficult, and there's going to be a lot of, tough and frank conversations that we'll have to have.
Yeah, I guess so. So Mansi?
Yeah, so I would also like to ask my last question to you. So it is, apart from the filmmaking point of view, my last question would be that so many research have shown that women of Indigenous community actually are more vulnerable in many situations. They suffer from so many sexually transmitted diseases, teenage pregnancies, or maternal mortality. So there are so many problems going on around children and women of Indigenous community. So as a filmmaker, you were there for quite a long time. What is your opinion, or what was your experience? Like, do you really feel that this is actually like that? Women are actually very vulnerable in their communities, and they do suffer some other difficulties other than like the community?
I don't know what it's like in other places. I mean, I do, but what's one of the things that's really interesting about this particular context is that from the day that the outsiders first made contact, the government first made forcible contact with this particular community, Neginha has been there all along. And she is an incredibly strong feminist. And she has made it a huge part of her kind of relationship with them to constantly just be kind of questioning both the external patriarchy of Western, you know, external Brazilian culture and expectations on them, but also the internal patriarchy that they've had in their culture, you know, since before contact. And so, you know, even just, I'll give you an example, like when we were kind of formalizing the co-production of the film, and we were talking about how we were going to shoot it and who was going to be in charge of the cameras. There's 6 villages. How are we going to kind of logistically organize production?
Yeah,
it was a priority for everyone. And especially, you know, Neginha would never have let us get away with not having gender parity in the film production. So we, you know, the cameras had to be accessible and used both by men and women because that confers power. And some of the women were struggling to make time because of raising kids. And so we made positions as executive producers for them to be involved in the decision-making process around the film. And that's just an example that permeates into everything in society. I think women in this particular, in the Uru-eu-wau-wau culture are very, very empowered, in fact. And, you know, the next leader after Bitate most likely is Tejubi, this woman. And we're really excited. And there's, you know, lots of women in the leadership positions already within their community. And so I think in general, I don't want to dismiss what you're saying, but I think they are perhaps a standout and have a very cool, progressive, and more inclusive culture than you might expect.
That's very nice to hear, like very interesting. That was my last question. Thank you so much for your time and congratulations for the successful movie. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Really
Thank you so much for your time, William.
Thank you so much for being here and watching the film.
Thank you.